Hello, and welcome to the 61st in an unknown number of podcasts. The poet John Donne famously wrote that no man is an island. And yet in these days of lockdown, shielding, isolating and social distancing, it can seem that it goes against his concept of humans as social beings. I have to say that while I've been producing these podcasts, there's been a feeling that I've been working in splendid isolation. So I'm very thankful through technology to once again welcome a guest to the podcast. This is the 5th episode of Desert Island Discs, and I'm very pleased to welcome today one of the many unsung heroes of our school. Normally you can find her in the general office, but today she's on a desert island. Today's castaway is Mrs. Player. So welcome, Mrs. Player.
Thanks, Ray, for inviting me to take part in your Desert Island Discs. I like to listen to the show on the radio. There's been some amazing castaways over the years.
Well, I'm glad now that you can add yourself to the list of famous KMAT castaways. Let's get started. The first question, as always, is what recordings would you choose to listen to?
Music. I listen to all kinds of music, different genres. If I like it, I like it. Hence my playlist has all sorts. Classical, jazz, rock, pop, folk. Yep, definitely all sorts. So this I did find difficult to narrow it down to just 3, but here goes. My first recording is a track called Protectors of the Earth by Two Steps from Hell from their album Invincible. When I first heard this piece of music, it gave me goosebumps and I found myself listening to it over and over, so had to get the album. It's a stirring piece of music and even better if you can listen to it loud. I think I'd want to take the whole album with me if I could. If you do listen to this album, I'm sure you'll recognise quite a few of the tracks, as they've been used in film, TV and adverts. My next recording is a Mike Oldfield track called Sentinel from the Tubular Bells 2 album. I used to listen to Mike Oldfield's original Tubular Bells album when I was in my teens, and then like most people I moved on to other artists and styles. When Tubular Bells 2 was released some years later, I remembered how much I enjoyed listening to his music, and this album also has some special memories for me. I was in the right place at the right time, I guess, and I was asked to do the voiceover for a corporate training film which used the Sentinel track in the background. Every time I hear this track it makes me smile, as it reminds me how the teamwork and commitment which went into making that short film resulted in an amazing sense of friendship and achievement when it all came together. So, on to my final recording, which is Living on a Prayer by Bon Jovi. My family would certainly agree that I'm no singer, but I guess like many people, when I'm on my own at home or in the car, I'll sing along to this song whenever it comes on. There's something about blasting out a good song that can really make you feel good.
Well, I definitely agree with you on that last point. And I agree also that music has that ability to summon up and evoke wonderful memories. Now, just like Mr. Lee last week, you've mentioned a band that I've never heard of before, and I think that it's a wonderful thing in these episodes where we can share music and perhaps find something new to listen to. So I'm definitely going to be doing some research into Two Steps from Hell, and like you say, I may well recognise some of their tracks. Now then, Mrs. Player, on to the next question, and it's which book would you read?
I've loved reading since childhood, and some of my earliest memories are of spending my pocket money in the local bookshop. I still have some of those books on my bookshelves today. I still pick up the odd one when I pass and start to flick through it, and then can be lost for half an hour. Given a lifelong love for reading and the books themselves, it's been a tough job to try to bring it down to a list of just 3. My first book is Catherine by Anya Seton. I love reading about history, and Catherine tells the true story of a girl who came to the English royal court at the age of 15. As the daughter of a minor Flemish herald, Catherine has no obvious prospects, but a sister is waiting woman to Queen Philippa, wife of King Edward III and the fiancée of Geoffrey Chaucer. Catherine marries Sir Hugh Swynford and has 2 children with him, but after his death she becomes mistress of John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, and bears him 4 children. After many years they do eventually marry, and basically every British monarch from Henry VII onwards, as well as 5 United States presidents, are descended from Catherine. It's just an amazing true story, a tale of passion and danger in the medieval court. There is a lot more written about Catherine now, but this book was first published in 1954, and I don't think it has been out of print since. My next choice is The Lord of the Rings by Tolkien. I can't remember how old I was when I first read this book. My copy is very battered now, but I couldn't put it down. It's an epic book for sure, and I know lots of people don't like it. I guess it's like Marmite, you either love it or hate it. I think there are some great inspirational quotes in this book, such as, "Even the smallest person can change the course of the future," or, "All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us," and "Courage is found in unlikely places." It's a tale of friendship, love and bravery, and I'm sure that a lot of listeners will have seen the films, so I don't have to go into details. But I will say that I think the story teaches us about hope, courage, friendship and sacrifice. My third book is From Dogfight to Diplomacy by Donald MacDonald. This is another book I couldn't stop reading once I'd started. My father was in the RAF, as was my father-in-law, who served during World War II, and my grandfather was a prisoner of war in Germany in 1941, so I felt a connection with the book when I bought it. Donald's memoirs aren't just about his time in the Air Force. The book tells a story of imprisonment, family tragedy and his diplomatic service. He was captured in 1941 and sent to various prisoner of war camps, and he helped to organise the famous wooden horse escape, immortalised in the classic film The Great Escape. After liberation by the Russians, he remained in the RAF, moved around various posts, learnt Russian and eventually ended up at the British Embassy in Moscow during the Cold War. It's a very well-written book and Donald just tells it as it is. You'll need to read the book to discover Donald's experience of being liberated by the Russians, but my grandfather didn't wait for the Russian army to liberate his camp. They woke up one morning to find all the German guards gone, and he and a friend decided to leave and walk towards the American army, who they eventually met up with.
Thank you for sharing that story with us, Mrs. Player. Now, I always find it interesting when you discover something new about the people that we work with, the people who are in our community, so thanks again. Now, just like your musical choices, your book choices are wonderfully eclectic, and if anybody out there listening is looking for something to read, I'm kind of thankful for Mrs. Player to give a kind of a book review for each one of those, so no doubt you may be interested to pick up one of those books. Now, on to the next question, Mrs. Blair. It's, what luxury item could you not live without?
My luxury item would be my telescope. Being on a desert island, there'll be no light pollution, so truly dark skies. Another childhood memory is lying on my back in the garden looking up at the stars while staying with my grandparents in rural West Wales. The sky was so dark there, and I used to spend hours looking up at the Milky Way. I think today we have forgotten to look up at the night sky. Perhaps we're all spending too much time looking down at our phones.
Indeed, and it reminds me of the Bruce Lee quote, where he says, "It's like a finger pointing away to the moon. Do not concentrate on the finger, or you will miss all of the heavenly glory." Now, with all the exciting things happening with SpaceX, with the launch of the Starlink satellites, and with the capsule going out to the International Space Station, I'm sure you've put your telescope to some really good use over these last few weeks. Now then, on to the next question. On the desert island, there's a large square dinner table. So who would you invite to dinner on your island?
Who would I invite to dinner? My first guest would be Tom Hanks. He's one of my favourite castaways on Desert Island Discs. Not only is he a brilliant actor, he just comes across to everyone that meets him as a lovely down-to-earth man with a great sense of humour. My second guest would be Professor Brian Cox, because I think he would be an interesting and witty person to chat to over dinner, and he could also certainly help me with identifying the stars and planets at the end of the evening. My final guest is Audrey Hepburn. As well as being an iconic award-winning actress, she was also a goodwill ambassador for UNICEF and travelled to the world's poorest countries to help children. I think she would have some amazing positive stories to tell.
Well, what a wonderful guest list that is, and I'm sure you'd have a wonderful after-dinner conversation. Now, it just so happens that I have a message from Professor Brian Cox just for you. Hello. I'd just like to say that whenever you look through a telescope at the night sky, when you're looking at the stars in particular, it's important to remember that the light has travelled vast distances, and so what you're actually seeing may not be there in the present time. And it's one of the reasons that I find physics fascinating and why I love it so much. Now, I've been asked to ask you a question, Mrs. Player, and the question is, what would be your message in a bottle?
I hope my message does reach a sandy beach or a rocky shore. Apart from the obvious, please rescue me, I'd like to say, it doesn't matter where we live as long as we live where we are. And remember to be kind to one another.
Now, in these uncertain times, I do believe that bears repeating. It doesn't matter where we live as long as we live where we are. Now, I can think of no better way to end today's episode, so thank you for those words, Mrs. Player, and thank you for all of your answers. Thank you to the listeners if you've tuned in to today's podcast. If you have any comments, as ever, do please let me know via Twitter @ChiefVicar. And as always, until tomorrow's podcast, be kind, take care, and stay safe.